Hi everyone. I'm not sure when you will be watching this, so good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever's applicable. I'm going to talk very briefly about some research that I did while I was spending 4 months in Strasbourg, France with IFE, which stands for the Institute for Field Education. IFE began with a month of 3 courses taught by French professors, which was really kind of just a way for us to up our French really quickly. We also had lots of outings to museums and cultural experiences. This was really important to orient me to life in France and prepare me really well for the second phase of my program, which was an internship and field research thesis that I worked on for 3 months, all in French. My internship was with a nonprofit called AMSED. Through my work with AMSED, I was working with children in after school programs at community organizations. And it was through this work, as well as talking with my French friends about gender, that my field research thesis was inspired. I wanted to know how interactions would constantly reinforce or recreate the French notion of gender, and specifically within Strasbourg, so a Strasbourgeois notion of gender. I was also curious how this notion of gender was taught to others. How did it perpetuate consistently across a population? So I formed 3 subsections of investigation: interactions between adults, those between adults and children, and interactions between children. So I spoke with, through informal interviews, and observed interactions between adults to establish a couple criteria identifying how adults perform gender in Strasbourg, and this is what I called the Strasbourgeois notion of gender. Then I looked to how I could track this notion of gender through adult-child and child-child interactions. I looked at adult-child interactions in community organizations where I was working for AMSED. So these were public spaces, and here I was exploring gender socialization. How was the Strasbourgeois notion of gender being transferred from adults to children? Finally, I observed interactions between children to see how much they incorporated the Strasbourgeois notion of gender into their actions. There were 2 features commonly present in interactions between adults, which I used to track the Strasbourgeois notion of gender. First, a gender-based hierarchy, and second, gendered roles. I found these elements were, for the most part, present in interactions between children, which suggests that the children I observed were learning the Strasbourgeois notion of gender. However, it did not seem that they were learning this from adults. Rather, I saw older children of the same gender as the child with whom they were interacting teaching gender hierarchy and gendered roles. For example, when one boy was made to hold a girl's hand in a line, he was shamed by taunts from older boys such as, "He's partners with her because he's a baby." That language suggests that partnering with a girl somehow made this younger boy weaker. I also often observed older girls teaching younger ones, but these teachings were more likely to defy the Strasbourgeois notion of gender than those of boys. For example, there was a time when older girls were forming a dance train with their hands on each other's shoulders. There was a younger girl who was much shorter and wanted to join. Initially, she put her hands on the hips of the girl in front of her, and I watched as she noticed all the other girls with their hands on each other's shoulders and reached up on her tiptoes to mimic them, changing her initial position. The shoulder touching that I observed was in stark contrast to their interactions with adults, in which they were touched all over their sides, their hair, their cheeks kissed, showing that not all interactions between children were imitation of those between adults and children. Girls were the most likely group of children to display these divergent behaviors. Being in France, and specifically being in France with the guidance of IFE, was huge in enriching my research. First of all, my French proficiency dramatically increased, which allowed me to form meaningful relationships with native French speakers, better understand French culture. I was viewed more of an insider by Strasbourgeois, and I was also able to have more accurate and nuanced findings. My time with IFE, my time in France, is also helping me figure out where I want to go next. I know that I really love languages, I want to continue exploring other cultures. So right now I'm working on pursuing an international career. I hope one day to work in diplomacy or for a multinational company.